The tiger was dying. It was not a quick, merciful death. It was a long, agonizing suffocation. The sun, hanging in a whitish, smoky haze, was not a source of life, but a copper-hot disk burning the very soul of the forest. For 3 months, not a drop of rain had touched the cracked earth. The moss, usually soft and spongy, had turned into dry, brittle parchment that crumbled to dust under any pour. The air did not smell of pine needles and dew. It smelled of smoke and dust. Somewhere far away beyond the ridge, the fire was already raging, and this faint, acrid smell was a constant reminder that the fire was coming. The birds fell silent. The animals left. But not all of them. Those who were too old, too weak, or too stubborn remained. And now they were all united by one all-consuming primal instinct: thirst. The entire complex, multi-layered life of the taiga, its entire food chain, had been reduced to a single point, to the stream. It was the last one. Where once turbulent, icy streams had rushed, now a thin, dirty trickle flowed in a deep, wrinkled channel of mud. It was no longer water. It was warm, murky sludge, smelling of silt and death, but it was moisture, and everyone was drawn to this moisture. Predator and prey forgot their roles. The law of the jungle was abolished. It was replaced by the law of drought. It was to this stream, at the height of the midday heat, that 2 people came. He was the first to emerge from the thick, dry raspberry bushes. A moose. He was the patriarch, old, powerful, his side sunken from hunger. He carried his crown, wide, heavy antlers, already covered with velvet, like a burden. Every step was an effort. His huge, usually moist nostrils were dry and cracked. His tongue was thick and heavy. He had been walking toward the water for 3 days, guided only by memory. He was the embodiment of ancient, fading power. And at that very moment, on the other side, he stepped silently onto the open gravel. A wolf. He was an outcast, young but already scarred, with a patch of fur torn from his side. He was a lone wolf. He had been expelled from the pack, and now he was a shadow, a ghost, doomed to starve to death. He was sinewy, his yellow eyes burning feverishly. For him, the moose was everything at once, a deadly enemy he feared, and unattainable food he could only dream of. But now the moose was neither. It was just another creature by the water. They froze. The world stopped. 10 meters of muddy riverbed separated them. 10 meters and 1,000,000 years of instinct. The elk, breathing heavily, stared at the wolf. His dark eyes held an age-old contempt for the predator, but now there was no fear in them. Only endless fatigue. He was too big to fear a single wolf, but too weak to waste his strength on the threat. The wolf crouched down. His lips twitched, baring his fangs, but the growl stuck in his parched throat. He did not see an elk. He saw a mountain of meat that he could not take. He saw the master of the forest, who could kill him with a single blow of his hoof. Tension hung in the hot air, ringing like a taut string. It was a classic stalemate. Mortal enemies caught unawares at the last source of life. The law of blood demanded battle, but the law of drought, older and more cruel, demanded drinking. First one out. The elk, as the elder and master, took the first step. Slowly, without taking his eyes off the wolf, he began to descend toward the water. The wolf did not move. He only licked his dry, cracked lips. It seemed that an unthinkable truce had been concluded, and at that moment, the wind, which had been absent, brought a new smell. It wasn't the smell of burning. It was a thick, musky, heavy smell of an animal. The smell of satiated, confident strength. The moose froze, raising its massive head. The lone wolf jumped up, the hair on his neck standing on end. His panic was almost palpable. He knew that smell. They didn't come out. They materialized from the shimmering haze. Shadows. 5 shadows. The flock. They weren't exhausted. They were a machine. 5 lean, muscular bodies moving as one. At the head was he, the seasoned leader. Huge, dark, with a grey back and cold, yellow eyes like ice. He was the one who had banished the lone wolf. The leader stopped on a hillock, assessing the scene, and something appeared on his face that a human might call a smirk. The picture was perfect. A gift from the gods of drought. Not just any moose. An old, exhausted moose driven to the water. Easy prey that would feed the pack for a week. But that was only the grand prize. There was a second one. The leader's gaze shifted to the lone wolf. The traitor. The rival. The one who dared to challenge him. And now he was here, trapped between the pack and the moose, in a perfect trap. The leader didn't make a sound. He just slowly shook his head. It was a silent command. The pack began to disperse. They didn't run. They walked. Two went around the moose, cutting off its path to the forest. Two others began to slowly move toward the lone wolf. They weren't just hunting the moose. They were taking both of them down. The lone wolf understood this in an instant. He had no chance. If he ran into the forest, they would catch him. If he jumped into the water, they would catch him on the shore. If he attacked the moose, the pack would tear him apart while he was distracted. He was a dead man. The moose understood too. He let out a low, guttural roar and struck the pebbles with his front hoof. He was preparing for his last fight. He knew he wouldn't come out alive, but he wasn't going to die alone. And then the lone wolf made his decision. It was a decision born not of logic, but of pure, primal despair. He stood between two deaths, one quick from the hooves of a moose, the other long and humiliating from the fangs of his former family. He did what no one could have expected. He turned around. He turned his back completely, absolutely, on the moose. He committed an act of unthinkable, suicidal trust, exposing his unprotected spine to the impact of 800 kilograms of panic and power. He turned to face the herd, and he growled. It was not the growl of an outcast. It was the growl of a warrior choosing whose side to die on. He preferred to die fighting those he hated, rather than those he simply feared. The leader was taken aback for a moment, but only for a moment. With a short, furious bark, he gave the order, and the two wolves closest to the lone wolf rushed into the attack. The moose watched. His huge brain, clouded with pain, couldn't process what was happening. The wolf, his enemy, stood 3 meters away, with his back to him, preparing to fight the other wolves. He could kill him right now. One blow with his hoof, and the lone wolf's spine would be broken. He could run away. While the pack tore the traitor apart, he would have a few precious seconds to hide in the forest. He did neither. Perhaps he saw in the loner's eyes the same despair that beat in his own heart. Perhaps he simply realized that they now had a common enemy. The moment the two wolves from the pack pounced on the lone wolf, the world exploded. The lone wolf met the first one, clamping down on its throat. It was a furious, blind tangle of teeth and fur. But the second wolf was already coming up behind him, aiming for his thigh, and at that moment, the moose let out a roar. It was not a moan. It was a trumpeting, deafening, biblical cry of rage. He did not run. He attacked. His front legs, heavy as blacksmith's hammers, flew into the air and crashed down on the second wolf. There was a sickening, wet crunch. The wolf yelped once and fell silent, its spine broken. The lone wolf, stunned, jumped back. The pack froze. The leader growled, unable to believe his eyes. The moose, their prey, did not flee. It defended. It defended the wolf. The lone wolf, breathing heavily, backed away, and his back rested against the moose's shaggy side, which smelled of swamp and fear. They stood back to back. An unimaginable, impossible bastion. A giant elk, stamping its hooves and bellowing, preventing the wolves from approaching. And a lone wolf pressed against its side, baring its teeth and meeting anyone who dared to break through under the giant's belly with furious attacks. It was a slaughter. The moose trampled and beat. The wolf tore and bit. They were one. Two hatreds merged into one fierce defense. The pack was not prepared for this. They'd come to hunt, not to fight a war. The leader, who had received a deep cut on his shoulder from a lone wolf, was the first to realize this. This prey was too costly. He let out a short, angry, intermittent howl, a signal to retreat, and just as quickly as they had appeared, they disappeared. They dissolved into the dusty haze, carrying the wounded man with them, and leaving the body of their comrade on the rocks. Silence. Silence fell, even heavier and thicker than before. It rang in his ears. It was saturated with the smell of blood, adrenaline, and musk. The moose was breathing heavily. His sides heaved like a blacksmith's bellows. Saliva mixed with blood dripped from his lips. Not his own. The lone wolf crawled back a meter. He lay on his stomach, unable to stand. He was trembling. His side was torn open, but he was alive. They looked at each other. A meter separated them. The union was dissolved. The agreement was fulfilled. They were once again the elk and the wolf, mortal enemies. The moose's gaze was cloudy. The wolf's gaze was wary. There was no gratitude in them. There was no understanding. Only a heavy, shared memory of the horror they had experienced. Recognition. The moose as the elder, as the victor, as the one who had retained more strength, took the first step. He turned toward the stream. Slowly, majestically, he lowered his huge horned head to the dirty, murky water and began to drink. Loudly, noisily, drawing life into himself. He offered his neck to the wolf, his most vulnerable spot. It was an act of supreme, absolute trust, or supreme contempt. The lone wolf watched the giant's Adam's apple bob up and down. He could have jumped now, sunk his teeth into the carotid artery. He didn't jump. He waited until the moose had drunk its fill. Then, limping, he took a few steps downstream, and he too lowered his muzzle into the water. They drank together. Enemies, allies, moose and wolf. The moose finished first. He raised his head, water dripping from his chin. He didn't look at the wolf. He just turned around, and his huge, dark shadow dissolved silently into the dry spruce forest. The lone wolf watched him until he disappeared. Then he turned away, and limping, he wandered off in the opposite direction, toward the rocks. The truce at the watering hole was over. The law of drought gave way to the law of blood. But on that day, for 10 terrible minutes, both were suspended.